what are your thoughts on we kind of went over how things are kind of getting better, but what are your thoughts on a lot of I guess the Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson type, Ben
Yeah.
Shapiro type stuff going on?
Yeah.
I guess the
So
Republican versus liberal like clash.
yeah. Well, so did I tell you the story last time? I met Jordan Peterson. Did I tell you that last time I was on here?
No,
Yeah.
no.
So kind of funny story. Like I used to work in this
Yeah.
law firm, and it was like a very old school running law firm. And so like it was an entertainment law firms. They have like all these like big actors, directors, people like really big time in Hollywood. And this guy comes in, and he's kind of a unique voice. And he like comes up to me and he's like, "What are you reading?" Because I could read all the time because it was like really old school. They didn't use a lot of technology, so I just had to answer phones. And I was reading Meditations, and he's like, "Oh, if you like meditations, you got to check out Man's Search for Meaning." And I was like, "All right, I will."
Oh man.
And then he like went off. We talked about meditations for a while. We talked about stoicism, and then he went off. And then like 2 weeks later, he had that like interview on like I think it was the BBC, where it was like the thing that made him famous. Like he like stumped this interviewer really hard. It was Jordan Peterson. He like stumped the interviewer really hard. And then he like blew up. It was like after he put out 12 Rules for Life. That's why he was there. He's consulting about 12 Rules for Life. And so he blew up. But yeah, I don't agree with a lot of what he has to say, but he gave me a great book recommendation. But to answer your question, like I know that was a big aside, but
no, that was a good story. Any type of meeting of somebody like that is a good story. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
he just randomly came up to you and kind of like patted you on the back and was like, what are you reading there?
Because he worked, so a law firm he was represented by the law firm I was working for. So he just he likes the Stoics, and he likes Jung, he likes Nietzsche, he likes all those guys. And so like because I was reading somebody he had a lot of familiarity with, he was like interested. So like we started talking about, I could tell you it was like a really smart guy based on our conversation. I was like, this guy's pretty bright. Because usually like we have like a lot of actors coming in, and so nothing against actors, but usually they're not going to know about like Nietzsche or like all the Stoics. That's not their cup of tea most of the time. But like he had so much knowledge about all these things, and I was like, dude, this guy's really smart. Like, who is this guy? And then I realized he was Jordan Peterson later. I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Was that the interview was it like a woman? Was it like a British woman?
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. And like he just kind of like, everyone's like, oh, he killed her or whatever. But it's like he really just was like kind of like mean to her. And everyone always says like he just kills it in his debates or whatever. But it's like, I don't know. Like, so my history with Jordan Peterson is I first saw him on YouTube doing like psychological because he's a psychologist or whatever.
Yeah.
I saw him like teaching psychology at his college, and he was talking about stuff like Hitler and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then about a year later, 2 years later, he just like probably a year later, he like blew up. But then he became this like kind of like toxic masculinity guy. And it's like I can see why people like him, because he is, like you said, he is a smart guy. He is a good debater, and he definitely is interesting to listen to. But then I saw some of the stuff that he was saying like on Twitter, and it's just kind of mean. Like, you know what I mean? It's like he's just picking on people, and it's like, what good is any of this? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, you're an old man. Like, why do you feel like it's good to pick on some girl who's overweight or like that one actress who became trans or whatever? I'm forgetting her name. Exactly. Yeah. He went after her. But yeah, in general, I do like listening to those guys like him, Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, even though Joe Rogan is kind of more moderate, but like he kind of seemed to like during COVID, he kind of seemed to have a lot of like kind of like conspiracy theory type people on.
Yeah. He had some advocate for during COVID for sure.
Yeah. And the problem that I have with that the most is that it's like, I'm fine with him having Jordan Peterson, whoever on, but like, he doesn't really seem to like push back very much on them. Sometimes he will.
Yeah.
But yeah. What are your thoughts on like Rogan and stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think I probably have more thoughts on Jordan Peterson than Rogan. I mean, Rogan, like to your point, he's a moderate, I think. And I think he had a lot of bad takes during COVID. And I think that like, well, first of all, let me just say, I think that Twitter is a mirage. Like, I don't think that Twitter is really representative of people in general. Like, I think it's representative of a very large minority of people. And I think that if you give it too much credibility, like I think a lot of places cater to Twitter because it makes a lot of noise, but I don't think it's really representative of how the general population feels about things. And I think that like a Twitter-esque crowd really doesn't like Rogan because like yeah, this guy's like Alex Jones on his podcast. And it's like the question is like, should we continue platforming guys like Alex Jones? And it's a legitimate question. And you know, he does have conspiracy theorists, guys like that on his podcast all the time. And so it's like, he has the biggest platform in the world. And it's like, he gets to choose who he gives that platform to. And if he's not giving it to the right people, I think people are it's more than fair to have their opinions about that. But I think, you know, if you listen to what he says, yeah, I don't disagree with a ton of it, but I also don't listen to him that much. I think that most of the time he's just trying to ask insightful questions to get a good episode, and I'm not going to fault him for that. But when it comes to Jordan Peterson, he's more of an interesting figure because I think that like if we were to sparse down our worldviews, like point by point, like I think that we actually I think most people would agree with a lot of the things he has to say, but the way that he packages it, it's very polarizing. And to your point, like when he's making tweets about Elliot Page, he's arming these people to go against what he says. And I think that like the reason why he has such a following is because, you know, he spends a lot of time talking about hierarchies. And I think there is, and so he talks about hierarchies. He's definitely leans right. And he's all about males really, as far as I can tell. And so
that's what it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I have, you know, my own issues with that, but I think that what he really speaks to is like, I think he holds the flag or the banner for people who he might consider, you know, the lower end of a hierarchy. And those are the same people that are susceptible to guys like Andrew Tate or, you know, or Joe Rogan on the lighter side of things. And I think that kind of audience is really easy to mobilize. And I don't think he always does it in the right way, but philosophically where he loses me is that he talks about he's a conservative, right? He doesn't like the idea of change largely, especially because oftentimes he feels like the change that progressives try to push, they don't really have solutions to it. It's more anarchy. They're tearing things down without having a solution to replace it. And I understand that, but where he loses me is when he talks about like the replacement being, or that we should consistently keep things the way they are. He talks about hierarchies a lot, but then he also talks about like myths and I don't know. Like, I think that if you're saying that the progressives argument is anarchist or socialist and it's not progressive in the ways it should be, but then you're saying that like we should keep things the way they are because that's the way they've been for all this time, and that we should always be going by dominance hierarchies. I don't know. That feels a little antiquated too. And I think that
completely antiquated.
Yeah.
I mean,
he uses the Bible all the time, and it's like,
yeah,
I don't know. There's the Old Testament and the New Testament are completely different things when you really look at them. So I don't think that that's like always the best source to base, you know, how we should govern entire civilizations on either. So I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings about Jordan.
Yeah, that's a big question well, first of all, yeah, like that old school way of thought that he has, which is basically we should just keep the things the way they are. It's just, to me, it's just completely outdated. And it's like, if he is pushing for like men over women, which he never like comes out and will say directly, but it's like, that's essentially what he's saying kind of, right? Is that like, we should just keep it like men, like have a men driven nation. But that's the big question though, right? Is like, I'm all for change and I'm all for making things better, mainly in the workplace. Like I'm a delivery driver for Amazon. First of all, it's a really hard job. I just lost my job like 3 weeks ago. Oh, I've been looking for another job. I got one at Amazon.
Congrats.
But it's like, it puts you in a situation just by losing your job. I got laid off, I didn't get fired or anything. Where like, I have no health insurance, you know, I have like very little time to go back to work to make money. It just doesn't seem like a great situation to be in for anybody. I don't know how anybody's doing it the way that they are. It seems like when I look around, I'm like, how are people living in this type of society? So I think that change is good, but the big question is, in terms of that type of thing, the big question is like you said, is there a solution to the change? And I think it would be going more towards like socialism or something, right? Which people like him just don't want. So like, do you think that there is a good solution to the problem?
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing is I'm all about solutions. Like if I were to boil down my philosophy to like one thing, it would be like there should be changes, but we should also have solutions to those changes. Because I think a lot of times people are like very content with being like, this is fucked up. And then like there's nothing else that comes after that. Or like, we should tear this thing down. And it's like, okay, then what? You know? And so like I think it's really important to think about what comes next and what could potentially be solutions. But to the point that you just raised, I think that's like one of my biggest political instincts is to think that that's bullshit, which is that like I just don't think that like healthcare should be so closely tied to employment. It's like I have healthcare. I have great healthcare, but it's only because I'm employed. And if I wasn't employed and I got sick, I would be fucked. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Of course. Yeah.
I would be like in ruins, you know? And I think that that's like a really, I just don't think that's ethical, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, to tie medical, to say like, okay, you're okay if you get sick as long as you're employed. I think that like people should be able to get laid off or get fired and not have a job and still, you know, be able to take care of themselves just because they're sick. Like that just makes complete sense to me. And it's also like it's something that is completely realistic economically too. It's just tough because democracy is really slow, and it will always be slow because, you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy within democracy. And so, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, I think that I think the left could benefit from being more proactive about. I mean, we did have you know, Obamacare that was, you know, meant to address this, but, you know, it's just really hard to come up with a uniform healthcare system for a nation as big as the United States. Because you're like 50 different countries in one.